Hi, today's story that matters is a classic tale of survival. You might even call it the classic tale of survival. It is, see if I can see here. Oh, I can't really see. To Build a Fire by Jack London. This is kind of a cool illustration I found and printed up. Um, you probably know the story. You either read it in high school or you just know it from culture. And of course, it is a story about a guy who is overmatched by nature. He goes tromping through the freezing Yukon up in Alaska, um, prospector maybe, something like that. And he has a dog with him, and an old man tells him, "Oh, this is really too cold to be out." The dog, we get in the dog's point of view, and the dog's like, "This is too cold to be out." But the guy's like, "Nah, I can do it." And he goes and he makes a series of bad moves and he freezes to death. You should know that story by now. It can't be a spoiler to you. And that's it. And so, what is the necessary survival information that this story tells us? Well, the simplest level is that, well, you better be prepared. If you're going to go out in the wilderness, you better take that outdoor survival class and learn about where to build fires and where not to, and how to keep warm and make sure you have the gear. Isn't actually what the story's about. In fact, the guy was fairly competent. He wasn't dumb exactly. He had warm clothes and all that. London tells us what the story is about. It's a deeper problem that this guy has, and the survival information that the story contains is also deeper than simply go to REI and make sure you have the right gear and the right training. Um, Here is the second page where the narrator just kind of steps in and tells us what's going on with this dude. The trouble with him was that he was not able to imagine. He was quick and ready in the things of life, but only in the things and not in their meanings. 50 degrees below zero meant 80 degrees of frost. Such facts told him that it was cold and uncomfortable, and that was all. It did not lead him to consider his weakness as a creature affected by temperature. Nor did he think about man's general weakness, able to live only within narrow limits of heat and cold. From there, it did not lead him to thoughts of heaven and the meaning of a man's life. 50 degrees below zero meant a bite of frost that hurt and that must be guarded against by the use of mittens, ear covers, warm moccasins, and thick socks. 50 degrees below zero was to him nothing more than 50 degrees below zero. That it should be more important than that was a thought that never entered his head. Well, there's his problem. He had no imagination. So, why is imagination so important to London here? Why is it so important to this story that matters? What is the big deal about imagination? Well, humans are not very capable animals when it comes to just basic survival. We have no fur. We have blunt teeth. We're soft. We're weak. We're slow. Our fingernails are useless as weapons. And yet we dominate the planet. I've said in earlier podcasts, and others have pointed out how fiction is the root of all civilization. We tell stories, and the stories become realities that guide our lives. And behind stories are imagination. Here's how I'm going to define imagination or illustrate imagination for the purpose of survival. Imagination is the ability to create characters, stories, situations, uh, plots, you might say, and put them in your mind and play them out. You might say game them out. You might say, you might call these things simulations. So, without having to learn every single lesson firsthand, we're able to figure out whether something is dangerous, whether something is good, whether something is bad, without having to go through it ourselves. And if we lack imagination, as all of us do to some degree, we have professional storytellers. Humans have always given a piece of the meat or the grain or whatever it is we've been collecting to at least one storyteller, even in the most ancient band style civilization, hunter gatherers. You always had some kind of a shaman, who is just another word for a storyteller. Um, and the reason why that person always shows up throughout our history is because this is a necessary part of our survival as Homo sapiens and as human beings. So, what so how does this guy, let's see, where should I go next? All of us can say that, yeah, we imagine things. I can always everybody daydreams, right? Everybody can just picture winning the lottery or me winning the big book prize or whatever it is or getting the big publication. Um, and I would submit that this is not actually useful. Maybe it is. Maybe it's useful imagination because we can figure out what we want, we can go toward it. But it's our default mode is to think that if things are going well, they'll continue to go well. And in fact, they'll go even better. And it takes a strong imagination to really go there and imagine things going badly. For example, 20 years ago, yours truly here would never have imagined, would never have believed if somebody would have said, "Hey, you know, in in your lifetime, it is not only possible, but it's probable, and I predict that your democracy, America's democracy, is going to be gravely attacked. That a dictator, an autocrat, is going to grab hold of the government, and one of the two major political parties will 100% go behind him, and he will just start dismantling every institution and norm of democracy all the way down to voting rights. And it is going to be what happened in Nazi Germany, Stalinist USSR, Maoist China. That absolutely can happen in the United States of America, and it could happen very quickly. I would have laughed. I would have said no possible way because things are the way they are, and they're always gonna be that way. That was my failure of imagination, and I believe I'm not the only one there. Perhaps if we would have been a little bit more willing to entertain darker stories, darker possibilities, we could have been better prepared for what ended up happening. You could also, you know, go back in time and talk about 9/11. You could talk about COVID and how we just really didn't imagine how bad things could get. And so we all could use a little more attention to our imaginations, a la Jack London here, and to build the fire. Um, I love this story about, I heard it on a history podcast, and it was about Adolf Hitler and his generals had commissioned a bunch of bean counter, university nerds to go and sum up to write reports on all of Nazi Germany's enemies, opponents' industrial capacity. How many bombs could they really build? How many airplanes could they build if they put their minds to it? And the report came back for the United States of America, which was not a powerful country in those days. And the bean counters weren't really, they were just following the data. They didn't really have a story to tell, but the data did tell a story. And what that story was that if the United States really got in this war, then the war was over already. There was no way that Germany could keep up with the amount of planes and bombs and bullets that the United States could potentially make. This was a moment for Nazi Germany, the leaders, Hitler and his generals, to have a real serious talk and a real serious think about a change in strategy, perhaps pull back their ambitions. But Hitler was incapable of imagining his own defeat. He was a megalomaniac, and all he could imagine were his daydreams of power. And so he just started laughing, and his sycophantic generals started laughing too, thereby just refusing to go in imagination where they would actually end up going in reality just a couple years later. And they dismissed the bean counters and continued on as if they had not heard that. And it wasn't long after that that Hitler shot himself in a bunker to avoid being arrested and tried and hung. And that's how it worked out for him. So he's another man, like our unnamed narrator here, who failed to imagine. Uh, I'm also interested in the samurai. I don't know anything about samurais and all this kind of stuff, but I have heard about the code called Bushido. And one thing I heard about it is that the samurai, before going into any kind of battle, was instructed to and trained to imagine his death in excruciating detail. And this was supposed to prepare him for that eventuality. And it is a place that most of us just do not want to go and refuse to go, but we do so at our peril. And that could actually mean the difference between life and death. So I guess I will leave you with an admonition that we should keep writing our stories that matter. We should keep reading our stories that matter. We should keep telling and showing our stories that matter because they matter.